Thank you, Gunjan, for inviting me to your collective Diversity, Equity, and Education. I would like perhaps to say a few words to myself before starting the presentation, so that you know who is speaking to you and where does the information come from, what is the background. Please also let me know, or if I know whether you hear me well and correctly. Yeah, so that everyone can fully join the presentation. So as Eva said, I have finished last year my doctoral studies at the University of Münster, Germany. After my studies in international economic and political relations, I really found it interesting to look at how power and power mechanisms work beyond the typical theories of governance and geopolitics, and what caught my attention were the ideas of Michel Foucault, a French philosopher and post-structuralist, and my ambition, as it always is with doctoral students, was to continue and extend some parts of his theory, which was a really high bar, but nonetheless I've tried to work on it, and I soonly found out it couldn't be done without using a empirical example. So after years of reflection and searching for a proper idea, I finally find it out to work on global developments, and one of them was the mental health crisis, and especially the rise of psychic disorders among the population. And what I was particularly looking at was how politics of prevention is developing according to these rising numbers of people suffering from burnout or depression. In my last year of the study, I've joined a European funded research project, Horizon 2020, where I looked with my colleagues and professor at lifelong learning policies in Europe, in 9 European countries, including the UK. And this was the moment where I entered the area of education, or higher education. My next turn, to look at how both these areas or interest, the interest in political science and interest in power technologies, and my new knowledge on education and higher education in Europe. I was trying to look how they could merge and how I can find overlaps and something which I can further develop. And this is what brought me to the topic which I would like to present today, and which I'm working on for a couple of months, and which is my starting point for my future postdoc project. And this is looking at how the emergence of it's still in brackets, new geopolitics of knowledge is transforming education, especially higher education, and affecting what I call the processes of subjectification. The technologies of becoming a subject to a certain discourse. Yes, so the structure of, is it? Just give me a, so So now he won't listen to me. Yes. The structure of today's presentation would have 6 points. I would like to make a short introduction to this broad topic. Then I would briefly reflect on the core concepts, discourse and subjectivity, although I know many of you are well aware of both of them, but still there are many aspects of what a discourse or subjectivity might be, and this I would like to clarify at the beginning, right at the beginning. Then I would look at how what I call 21st century key skills and competencies discourse, the new word that I've added is the discourse. The idea of 21st century skills and competencies is already there, but I perceive it as a global discourse. I will look at particular frames or frameworks that develop and advance the idea of concentrating or focusing on certain skills and competencies. I will then distinguish 4 aspects that, from my short analysis, frame the production of what I call subjectivities or modes of self-conduct. And I will try to provide a brief but fine-grained analysis of subjectivities. After I finish this part, I would like to conclude it and came back to the overall topic, the global or the new geopolitics of knowledge. So many researchers and scholars signal that there is a large transformation of education and especially of higher education that comes from various sides and that could be observed over the last 20 to 30 years, so especially with the start of the new millennium. It would be a very large discussion. I'm sorry, I don't have so much time to explain more on the aspects of this transformation, but I would like to focus on 3 levels, which I choose as entry points for observing this transformation. So the first transformation, or the first level of transformation, the micro level, is the change of the individual change, which led to the adoption of a certain modus of self-conduct. The social figure used for this modus is Homo economicus, a man that is reasoning using the logics of efficiency, productivity, competition, and so on. So this is the change of the social figure, change of the at the individual level towards people who try to predict, who try to reason in effectiveness and creativity and innovation, and optimize their choices. The macro level connects with this individual micro level, is the prevailing or the invasive logic of neoliberalism, which is not only economic and political agenda, but has colonized also other spheres of social life, including education and higher education. This could be captured on the transformation of university, the transformation of structures, institutions, academic careers, and so on. again, the rationales or the logics of effectivity, productivity, quality assurances, and so on, is dominating. We can see it well on international rankings, different comparisons, and so on. So universities or high school or higher education institutes also become social or collective actors in a competitive economic playground or battleground. And finally, what I've called the meta level or epistemic level, the transformation after the start of the new millennium was driving towards creating so-called knowledge-based economies, but also knowledge-based societies. So, and this has become, especially in Europe and Western countries, the hegemonic imaginary, social imaginary, deciding on what the policy agendas shall focus on. So these are the three entry points from which to observe the transformation of higher education. What I was in particularly looking for was the turn towards excellence and innovation, which to my sense appear as the current peak of the neoliberal domination. Excellent projects are being funded. Universities, states and countries invest into innovative technologies. High school subjects are being evaluated according to their added value towards innovation and excellence and so on. And my particular, my empirical part from within this discourse on excellence and innovation was looking at how this changes the notion that subjects or individuals have, how they start perceiving themselves, reflecting on themselves, but above all, behaving according to these rules and these demands. And while searching for different expressions of this discourse, I found it out that there is a rising interest in identifying and defining what could be called key or core skills and competencies that a future worker would need for the 21st century, which are currently in, but it's still, the discourse is going on. Now I would like, before I start my discussing and my results, I would like to quickly clarify the core concepts, which is discourse and subjectivity. I understand discourse as a meaning-making process in sense of constructing social reality, and this is how, relating to Kitsus and Spector, I try to interpret social problems as problems which are also discursively constructed, not only but also discursively constructed. Further on, which is closer to the domain of education, I try to work on with what Parreira, Amaral, and Dale have identified as discursive opportunity structures in relation to institutional opportunity structures that define what options are the individuals given in order to progress in the education or in order to not transit, but transfer from school to work or from work to work. Yeah, so this transition regimes. According to subjectivity, I understand it as a part of a discourse, or as a necessary aspect of a discourse. In order for a discourse to function, it has to have someone who bears the discourse, who produces and reproduces the discourse, and these are subjects. And I understand them in line with what Foucault called power technologies. This is to clarify how discourses make subjects conform to certain ends and follow certain rules rather than others, or follow certain logics or rationals rather than others. And finally, going back to Blackman et al., I perceive subjectivity not as a given category, but as something which is shaping, but also shaped by prevailing social, cultural, and political spaces. Okay, so now let's come to identifying what I call the 21st century key skills and competencies discourse. The roots of this debate of finding a proper skills and abilities that future students would need to obtain go back to the idea that the next century is identified as really unpredictable and unstable and uncertain. There are too many unknown unknowns, to quote Donald Rumsfeld. And this is why we need to work on skills and competencies which would help us to combat or to cope with, at least, with this unpredictabilities. A second route is that the prediction is that more and more jobs would be found in so-called knowledge work occupations, which would be creative jobs, jobs which require reflectivity, cooperation, creativity, and this is also an important aspect to take into consideration. So as a result, different structures, international organizations, national organizations, but also global partnerships and even global businesses, including Dell, for example, are working on what could be called a framework of key skills and competencies. In what I will show you next, I have tried to look for the most, I would say, most widespread frameworks which I could find or which were quoted by other authors, and I tried to collect them from various sources. I have two tables which are showing you the year of the framework. There wasn't enough space to include the bibliography, but I can send it afterwards. You can see the framework, the name of the framework and year of issue. I have started with the year 2003. Different clusters which have been developed within the framework to identify key skills and competencies, and then the actual names that they have given to them. I have identified altogether 6 different frameworks. Just give me a second. Yeah, 6 different frameworks, starting with NGOG 2003 and ending with OECD and European Commission 2019. As you can see, and now I will come to my short analysis of the frameworks. My first observation was that the clusters and definitions from really various frameworks matched together in many parts and varied only in minor details or different terminologies. And this is more interesting when I was thinking that they have developed them over a span of more than 15 years in countries with varying educational systems, with varying economic situation and political situation, and nonetheless they have correlated in major issues and major skills and competencies they have identified. Among the core or key skills, the 4 C's could be named: the critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. These have the leading position and define the most desired cognitive abilities. Comparing to that, interpersonal and intrapersonal competencies have received less emphasis in curricula and were rather unpopular among the leading frameworks. I would now present 4 aspects that I have developed from these frameworks and that channel or frame or shape the production of subjectivities. That's the notion of the self-conduct. First of all, the first aspect is a sort of enforced uniformity and homogeneity of the subjects. As it could be observed, the search for these frameworks and the desired skills and competencies is showing striking conformity and agreement among international organizations, research think tanks, national governments, and so on. This is more surprisingly given their vagueness and impossibility to measure. Some of the skills are really hard to measure in any aspect, and moreover, they are very highly they're highly subjective in understanding. When critically assessing this focus on key skills indirectly implies that there are marginal skills or unnecessary skills. And it canalizes from the very beginning the process of obtaining and mastering skills at schools, in which individuals or subjects are no longer free to choose from a variety of different skills and competencies, but rather are conducted to conform to this, I call them supreme ideals for the future labor market. The question is, however, we still don't know whether they indeed will be necessary on the future labor market. It is just the projection or the imagination of how the future would perhaps look like. The second aspect that I found problematic was that the skills and the competencies were fostering individualization and competitiveness. When turning to etymology, to have a competence means to do something well or successfully. I'm now quoting Cambridge Dictionary. that is not to fulfill something to the best of one's own ability, but rather to fulfill a given task as it was desired and expected to be fulfilled. What I derive from it is that while in the first case, self-satisfaction stays in the foreground, the latter case is a response to external expectations on success, which is a distinctly Anglo concept, to quote Hampson and Mignolo, individualistic, defined by employers and not contested in other social forces. So gaining a competence goes along with the readiness to compete. The word competition and competence have the same root, for the best performance of external tasks. Although these are individualistic skills, they're not set by the individuals themselves, but are dictated by external expectations, norms, and values. To get a bit more quickly, my third aspect was that the competencies, the key skills and competencies are being presented as something which is natural and self-evident, as a self-evident phenomenon. The frameworks present them as a matter of fact without asking those who ought to gain and make use of them. The future subjects are instead portrayed as initially and pre-reflexively willing to gain any competencies needed for a successful school to work or work to work transition. Okay, and my last aspect was that the development and the international sharing of these key skills and competencies stabilizes the geopolitical hegemony of knowledge-based economies and societies. On a global scale, they introduce a tacit criteria expressed, as I've said previously, in rankings, impact factors, international cooperation standards, and so on. And they are increasing through the discourse on excellence and innovation. They are increasing expectations and demands on subjects. In order to be excellent and innovative, you need to work on your own skills, abilities, self-actualize yourself, and so on. So my almost last part, is the rather fine-grained analysis of subjectivities. I'll try to finish in 5 minutes. What I tried to develop was a rather a different tangent paths within or in which the production of subjectivities takes place. So I don't portray them as given, but rather as analytical categories from where to observe the transformation and the production of subjectivities. The first tangent pair contrasts the logics behind the willing versus unwilling subjects. The skills and competencies discourse focuses individual skills and competencies and replaces the focus on structural changes and rearrangements. This self-actualization and self-responsibilization of subjects fosters the production of an employability and market-driven subjectivity, which was well described by the sociologist Ulrich Brückling as the modern self-entrepreneur. In this production of subjectivities, however, to my sense, not skills and competencies gained by subjects, but subjectivities, that is, the modes of self-conduct based on desired competencies, turn into a source of production. Subjects are only disposable if they acknowledge and enhance their self-entrepreneurial subjectivity, show passion for growth, and a will to accelerate, to quote the Czech sociologist Philip Vostal. The willingness and passion of the subjects, that is the guarantee that they will try to obtain new skills and competencies, whatever their usefulness might be, become the new production factors. Within this logic, the differentiation of the willing subjects co-constitutes or co-creates its opposite, that is the unwilling subject, labeled as unemployed, undocumented, or disposable individual. While the willing subject finds its self-actualization in the skills and competencies discourse, I perceive the lifelong learning discourse as an attempt to cover up or to find a place where the so-called unwilling subjects, those who are unable to continue education for some reasons, being they dropouts, needs, or whatever, that they try to include them to this one compact tendency. A second tangent pair is the difference between what I call outcome-oriented and quality-based competencies. And I will show you my next picture made by myself. I have tried to compare the so-called outcome-oriented and quality-based skills and competencies. I perceive the outcome-oriented skills as skills that shall increase the employability of subjects, while those quality-based as skills and abilities which have a more holistical and long-term influence on the development of the individual, and put more weight on personal integrity and ability to interact with limited capabilities and possibilities. Okay, just to finish it, my last pair was the difference between economic growth and social inclusion. We can say that reasoning on key skills and competencies might stimulate or increase the governments to produce positive effects, but it is hard to say whether this global discourse on skills and competencies takes into consideration regional disparities among different countries. For we have regions which certainly might look forward for a highly developed labor force, but still there are other regions which do not need this very highly focused labor force, but rather look for different kind of skills and abilities. So the question is, would it be leading to more social and inclusion and regional coherence? That is not clear so far. Okay, to conclude my presentation, this geopolitical transformation that I've tried to describe signals at least the transformation of power relations in three ways. First, it leads or conducts individuals to adopt to the subjectivity of self-organizing learners and self-innovators, continuously working on themselves. Second, it gives power or authorizes certain group of people that can decide what counts as excellent and innovative and what kind of skills and abilities the future labor force will need. This in turn allocates, first of all, it allocates the interest in certain areas, but also funding, material infrastructure, and academic personnel. And my third observation on this transformation of power relations globally is that this is an all-encompassing strategy that promotes self-entrepreneurism on the one hand, and takes care for the excluded and disposable subjects on the other hand, leaving no space for refusion or resistance. It is hardly imaginable to get some funding or get attention for different kind of skills, different kind of frameworks, different kind of knowledge production. So this is something which is, from my critical perspective, a rather worrying observation. I will finish now. I'm very sorry I've been late for a few minutes. I will now leave the word to you, Eva. And thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I just clap my hand like that. Yes, I would like to invite everyone to turn on your camera if that's possible. Thank you, Joseph, for sharing your insights into the new emerging forms of subjectification and learning subjects through, as you said, the key skills and competencies discourses. So the emphasis is on the discourses around these, the emergence of these skills and competencies, and how these influence or shape, maybe also reciprocally, the self-conduct of individuals. I think it was a special or a different presentation today because it was theoretical, yeah, and not tied to a particular context, but as the main title was the Geopolitics of Knowledge. And that would bring me, if everyone is fine, to a first question, and then I would like to open the floor for everyone to have a conversation around it. So I'm interested a little bit more to know more about where these frameworks emerged and who developed these frameworks. So, for example, in which particular countries, which groups of actors are these scholars, transnational organizations, and so on. And also, maybe, I don't know if you have thought about those who don't participate in the shaping of these of this discourse or these discourses.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, you remind me that I was, while I was preparing myself for the presentation, I found it that indeed in your collective, you research more on specific countries or specific thematic problems, but I've tried to come as close as I could to your topic, education, equity, and diversity.
And I think that was great. So that was a positive.
Try to do my best. Yeah, yeah. Yes, the frameworks. So I can turn back to them. I've composed the frameworks from different sources, looking at the development or looking at how global organizations like OECD UNESCO or European Union, for example, identify them. One particular source was identified by the American Association for Higher Education. And the last one was the OECD study. It's from the World Economic Forum. Yeah, so these were, to my sense, the leading agendas. I was also trying to cover the Asian market or the Asian area. There was one particular framework, which was included in the P21 framework, definition.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, and shows in a way also where the power of knowledge creation for tomorrow is situated. But I would like to open the floor to everyone and invite questions, comments, or whatever comes to your mind. Yes, Barbara.
Hi. Thank you so much, Joseph. That was really interesting and really appreciated. And I agree these frameworks need to be critiqued. I think Foucault is marvelous for doing it. It made me think about PISA, and in particular, PISA for development, because the idea is for the SDGs that PISA is going to be extended, which it was largely focused on the global north, and now the idea is that it will be extended to many countries in the global south with a view to measuring uptake of the SDGs. And I posted in the chat this project that is focused on global competencies, and it just seems an excellent example of what you are focusing on, how something that is intrinsically qualitative is subjected to a kind of hierarchies, classifications, evaluation of judgment, and then with metrics imposed upon those, so that what is intrinsically a qualitative thing is mathematicized, and it doesn't matter how subjective it is, it gets reduced to numbers that make it possible to make comparisons across very different contexts in a kind of global dimension. So this is about global citizenship, and what that might look like. And yeah, I mean, if there's anything that seems more subjective and more potentially variable, what is that going to be, so it's just, I mean, it's, I don't know whether you've come across it, but it's just like another example of what could be a really good, if you haven't come across it, a really good thing to look at for as an illustration of your arguments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That this was a wonderful example. I was also struck by how different where the context from where the frameworks were developed, but still they came to very similar definitions of what is a key skill and ability.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I will take a couple of questions if there are any, because we have 10 minutes left. I can see Gunjan, do you have a question? Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. It's more of just adding to what Barbara said, and it was, I mean, great presentation, really. And I think when you wrote the PISA, the whole PISA assessment, is making me think about India, and how India boycotted the PISA after having, on the very grounds that it was very decontextualized when the students had to go through the assessment. But now, after having resisted PISA for many years, the recent government has signed up for the PISA. So we're having the PISA assessments in these the government schools in the country, and also this discourse of global competence coming into the national education policy, the new education policy. So you could see that these understandings of global citizenship now coming into our the local education policies in the country. So I think that just shows that the hegemonic, the knowledge production and the kind of the dominance of those frameworks and the effects that it has on the national and the local. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
Thank you, Gunjan. And your example just reminded me, I think, your last point of your presentation, Joseph, when you said there is no space for resistance or refusion. So that in a way illustrates your example, Gunjan. Any other question, or would you like to react, or should I, maybe we can see if we have some more questions or comments, if that's fine, yeah. If not, please, maybe.
Yes, I would just like to add what Gunjan said. This was when I was working on the project of lifelong learning policies. There were especially concentrating on those who are dropping out from a regular education. They don't follow a standardized life course and so on. So to my sense, this is to outweigh, so to say, the focus on key skills, and also to look up and bring into the educational process and the production those who for some reasons cannot or want not follow these life courses.
I will read a comment from someone who is not able to ask directly. So there is written from Madhuvanti from India. So sorry for maybe not well pronouncing your name, but thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. Apologies for not being able to ask directly, as I'm traveling at the moment. One question with respect to regional disparities that you mentioned. In less capitalized countries such as India, we have seen severe privatization and individualization of almost every aspect of life. These skills are taught and highly valued from the general workforce here, to the extent that these skills are expected from children at preschool centers to prepare them for a neoliberal world. At the same time, if we were to begin the decolonization of such spaces, it would be met with severe resistance unless this is complemented with larger structural changes in the global economy. How do we then approach such spaces, especially in the context of developing countries? That's an important and maybe difficult question to answer. Do you want to react to that immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking about what other, I would say, what other attempts are there to push different kind of imagining the future. In fact, it's about how we imagine the future to come. My worry, or not a worry, but my problem with key skills is that we still don't have the jobs created for such skills, and it would be very hard to find employers. I was also looking for employers, or looking for job advertisements. No one is asking you to be creative or innovative, because it's hard to measure. There is no institution who can give you a leaving certificate on creativity or innovation or cooperation. So although there are some ways to, as Barbara Prusa said, to digitize them or materialize or make it measurable, it's still highly volatile and still highly difficult to understand whether indeed they will be needed on the labor market. They are foreseen as highly valuable, but no one knows whether they indeed will be desired by the employers in the future years, 10 to 20 years, for example.
Okay, we have another question or comment from Gerard Conway. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm from the discipline of law, but it seems to me that the general framework has relevance to a lot of different fields or domains, and the notion that there's a sort of a vocabulary or a language of competences and skills that's kind of controlling in some way or limiting in some way other possibilities. For example, in it can be something connected with, for example, research frameworks that tend to emphasize particular policy outcomes or policy relevance, as opposed to what's sometimes called blue sky or fundamental thinking. But I suppose that's a kind of a comment, but in a more specific question is, well, maybe if you could react to that, but also a specific question is, in your research or your case studies, did you come across any specific kind of thinking or kind of skill or tendency in that regard that was tended to be, that was omitted, that was absent from the kinds of competence frameworks that you came across?
Yes, it's hard to look for something which is not visible or which is not directly mentioned. Instead of searching for them, I have tried to what I've distinguished as quality-based skills and competencies. Look for those or imagine those which aren't mentioned in the frameworks. And compare them. So I have tried to find a counterpart or a different expression or a different aspect. So, for example, compared to innovation and looking constantly for new ideas, thinking of preservation of ideas, how we can preserve good ideas instead of teaching critical thinking, which I consider very important, rather teaching what I call a reflection or a reflective thinking. I mean, take time to think about certain issues. What wasn't mentioned, and I've written one article about it, is vulnerability, which is mostly considered a rather negative condition, or it has a negative connotation, but far more less was said about a sort of sensibility that people under vulnerable conditions develop and have. There is a heightened sense for justice, for example, for equality, and so on. And no aspects of this were mentioned in any of the frameworks, or were mentioned very low. I mean, like those intrapersonal skills were mentioned very low, mostly as a sort of personal integrity, to develop personal integrity. But what does that mean was never identified or defined. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Barbara, do you have a further observation or question?
Yeah, it's just in relation to the origins of this notion of something as the notion of competencies. It's related to the development of outcomes-based assessment, and that arose in the 1990s and has become generalized in education and higher education. And in some curricula. I mean, South Africa adopted an outcomes-based assessment curriculum. But the idea is, I think you're right, Joseph, it is trying to take out the subjective elements of assessment and the notion is that by specifying something very clearly, it becomes transparent and more objective and more easily measurable in assessment terms. I mean, this has been hugely critiqued. My own doctorate was an assessment, and it was, you know, critiquing through Foucault actually what was happening through the application of these criteria-based, outcomes-based frameworks. It is about making masking qualitative judgments. It's covering over them. There's a kind of obfuscation that is happening in this appeal to clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's largely, I think, you know, the question about what are the origins of these discourses is around the beginning of the 1990s. I think that this movement really took off. But yeah, I mean, higher education across all the UK, across all Europe, is part of European, what do you call it? They have a shared, I've lost the term for it now.
European educational area or research area, single research area. Yeah,
all of this Bologna framework stuff. So that's been, just taken for granted now. We all mark now we say what our learning outcomes are, and we mark to them, you know, even if they are actually deeply qualitative things. So that is just a background comment.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara and everyone, for, I think, a fruitful discussion. If there are no other burning comments, I think we will come to a close. But Joseph, I would like to invite you to say maybe a word. I think your presentation is also part of a book chapter, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
A part of what? Sorry, I didn't.
Wasn't it also a book chapter?
Yes, that's a book chapter. Yeah, that will be, I mean, should be published this year by Palgrave, I guess, or Routledge, I'm not sure. I can send you later the link to the publication, of course.
Yeah.
And for your private use, of course, the chapter, feel free to contact me via Gunjan or other partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm aware that you will continue this work regarding academics. We hope maybe to hear further down the line some more insights